Fresh off the NCAA tournament, St. Francis has pulled the full Hartford, dropping down to Division III right after appearing in March Madness and becoming the 27th men's basketball Division I program to drop out of Division I since the 1973 divisional restructure. To quickly go through those 27, first you had the Cal State LA Diablos dropping down to Division II in 75, the Northern Colorado in 78 dropping down to Division II. They've returned to Division I. Denver in 79 dropping down to NAIA. They've returned to Division I. The Seattle Chieftains dropping to NAIA in 1980. They're back in Division I as the Red Hawks. The Catholic Cardinals dropping down to Division III in 81. Portland State dropping down to Division II in 81. They're back in Division I. Westchester dropping down to Division II in 82. The Baltimore Super Bees dropping athletics in 83. The Oklahoma City Chiefs, former member of the Midwestern City Conference, dropping down to NAIA in 85. West Texas State, today West Texas A&M, dropped down to Division II in 86. Utica dropped down to Division III in 87. Armstrong Atlantic Pirates dropped down to Division II in 87. The Houston Baptist Huskies dropped down to NAIA in 89. They're today Houston Christian, back in Division I. The Oral Roberts Titans also dropped down to NAIA in 1989. They're back in Division I as the Oral Roberts Golden Eagles. Hardin-Simmons dropped down to Division III in 90. The USIU Soaring Gulls dropped down to NAIA in 91. The Augusta Jaguars dropped down to Division II in 91. The Brooklyn Kingsmen to Division III in 92. The NEIU Golden Eagles dropped athletics in 98. Morris Brown dropped athletics in 2003. Of course, their football stadium was where We Are Marshall was shot. The Birmingham Southern Panthers dropped down to Division III in 06. Their baseball team just had a magical Cinderella run before the school closed down last spring. Winston-Salem State, an official list would not have Winston-Salem State on it since Winston-Salem State never fully transitioned to Division I. I'm going to be a bit more liberal with my list and include them since they were midway through that transition. They dropped back down to Division II in the CIAA in 2010. The Centenary Gentlemen, who play in the Gold Dome in Shreveport, they dropped down to Division III in 2011. Savannah State in 2019 dropped down to Division II. Hartford dropped down to Division III in 2023. The St. Francis Brooklyn Terriers, one of the original members of Division I, and one of 4 original D1 members who never made the NCAA tournament, disbanded athletics in 2023, and now the St. Francis Red Flash are moving down to Division III in 2026. Of course, this would not include the New Orleans Privateers, who announced they were going to move down to Division III, that switched it to Division II, but they aborted that move midway, so they never ended up transitioning, and they ended up sticking with Division I. And of course, these are men's basketball Division I programs only, so it would not include, for example, University of Tampa, who was Division I in football until 74. They did not have a men's basketball program back then. Of those 27, 9 dropped down to Division II, and then 2 of those 9, Portland State and Northern Colorado, returned to Division I. St. Francis will become the 8th to drop down from Division I to Division III. Of course, Hartford was the 7th. 6 of the 27 dropped down from Division I to NAIA, but 4 of those 6 ended up returning to Division I later on. The Oklahoma City Chiefs and the U.S. International Soaring Gulls never returned to D1, but Denver did, Seattle did, Houston Baptist, now Houston Christian, did, and Oral Roberts Titans, now the Golden Eagles, did as well. And 4 of those 27 Division I dropouts disbanded athletics right away: NEIU, St. Francis Brooklyn, the Baltimore Super Bees, and Morris Brown. Now remember, these graphics depict what happened at the time the school dropped out of Division I, not where they are today. So for example, it'll list Birmingham Southern Division III because they dropped down to Division III, but today Birmingham Southern doesn't even exist. As we dive into the factors working against St. Francis, to start, St. Francis was one of the 5 smallest Division I schools. Listed here are the 6 smallest, but as you can see, a school like Davidson, they might have a small enrollment, but they have a monster endowment, so the school's super wealthy. Virginia Military Institute and Wofford, to an extent, have a pretty rich endowment as well. And then you have Presbyterian and Wagner, which have endowments of right under 100 million. And finally, St. Francis, their endowment is half of the endowment of Presbyterian and Wagner. So you can overcome a super small enrollment if your school is really wealthy, because that means you have a lot of wealthy alumni who donate a lot. But if you don't have those super wealthy alumni, that's where a small enrollment's going to hurt you. Now, St. Francis has the double whammy of having a bottom 5 enrollment in Division 1 and also being located in the smallest town in Division 1. Elkhorn, MVSU, and Mount St. Mary's are also in the 5 smallest towns, as well as St. Bonaventure, but St. Bonaventure have a lot of wealthy alumni and they have big fan support in basketball. So being located in such a small town isn't really going to impact St. Bonaventure that much, but it could be largely impactful for schools like St. Francis, Elkhorn, MVSU, or Mount St. Mary's, especially in the NIL era, where schools are desperate for partnerships with corporations. Like many small private schools and like many schools located in the Northeast or Midwest, St. Francis is facing hefty enrollment challenges. In the past 5 years, St. Francis has lost 10% of their enrollment, and that's before you consider the catastrophic enrollment cliff that will see a 15% decline in the number of 18-year-old college-going students in the 4-year span from 2025 to 2029. And that 15% decline is the nationwide average. That percentage is going to be even higher in the Northeast and Midwest. Once again, like many small private schools, St. Francis is facing financial challenges. S&P Global gave St. Francis a triple B rating and revised their outlook from stable to negative in 2024. As a reference point, Hartford had a triple B minus rating when they were dropping down from Division 1 to Division 3. In addition, St. Francis was also facing $37 million in total debt outstanding as of fiscal year 2023. Finally, if you look at Forbes financial grades, there were 5 Division 1 schools who were ranked in the bottom 50 in the country of all colleges and universities. Hartford was one of those 5 at 41st worst in the country, and they dropped out of Division 1. And St. Francis is also in that bottom 5, ranked as the 49th worst, and they are also dropping out of Division 1. So 2 of the 5 on this list are dropping out of D1. As we all know, the new era of NIL, the transfer portal, and then the looming house settlement puts tremendous strain on the smaller Division 1 athletic departments. And the public reason St. Francis gave was, quote, "It was the liberalization of the transfer portal a few years ago. It was our inability to compete with the name, image, and likeness scheme that's just out of our reach. Plus the uncertainties that go along with being a small Division 1 institution. In a perfect world, we would have stayed in the NEC. There were a lot of factors that were really stacked against us that kind of forced us into this position." SFU said the decision to move to Division 3 wasn't directly related to the house settlement, but it definitely appeared on their radar. How much will St. Francis save moving to Division 3? That's hard to figure because it's hard to get the finances for a private school. But if we use Hartford as a reference point, since they moved from Division 1 to Division 3, economist Andy Schwartz was hired by a group called the Friends of the Neighborhood who wanted to keep UHart in Division 1 a few years ago. Now, UHart had hired Car Sports Consulting for their own study, and Car Sports Consulting said that the school would save $10 million. Andy Schwartz, who was the economist that was hired by the group that wanted to keep UHart in Division 1, he did his own study, and he said the Car Sports study was flawed, and that UHart would only save $1 million moving to Division 3 and not $10 million. So if we use that $1 million as our frame of reference, that would have been the savings before the era of NIL, house settlement, etc. However, with new expenses and rising costs and Department of Education cuts and the enrollment cliff, St. Francis in the new era would likely save more than Schwartz's estimated $1 million for Hartford in the previous era. In all, I wouldn't say it was one thing that forced St. Francis to move down to Division 3, but rather the perfect storm of several factors. From the enrollment decline, St. Francis has lost 10% enrollment over 5 years, to the enrollment cliff, there's expected to be a 15% decline in 18-year-old college-going students over the next 4 years, and that's expected to hit the Northeast and Midwest harder, to St. Francis being one of the 5 smallest Division 1 schools, which limits the available pool of student fees that you can milk, to St. Francis being located in the smallest town in Division 1, which really limits their ability for corporate partnerships in the NIL era, to the financial situation of the school. They're one of 5 Division 1 schools that were ranked in the bottom 50 of Forbes financial ratings. And now 2 of those 5 have dropped out of D1. To the new era of the NIL and transfer portal, which was the public reason that St. Francis gave, and ultimately what they would save by moving from Division 1 to Division 3. If the economist that a group wanting to keep Hartford in Division 1 said that the school would save $1 million by moving to Division 3, and that was before NIL and the House settlement, then today in the new era of new expenses, rising costs, Department of Education cuts, and enrollment cliff, St. Francis would likely save more than $1 million by moving down to Division 3.